Shalom. This week's parsha is Parshat Miketz. Usually, Parshat Miketz is the Shabbat of Chanukah. Sometimes it's not, but most of the times it is. So happy Chanukah for those of you who are hearing this right before Shabbat Chanukah. I'd like to make a clarification about something that people have an impression about, starting from elementary school age and then continue on through adulthood. And of course, there's quite a lot of things that it's good to relearn them as adults, especially the Aleph Beis. We could make a whole video series about proper Hebrew pronunciation and the difference between the various letters and the nikudot, the various vowels, but that's not for now. What is for now is the idea that Joseph, immediately became the viceroy of Egypt upon interpreting Pharaoh's dreams and proving that he had some sort of godly wisdom. I'd like to explain. We read about in last week's parsha on Vayeshev, starting with the 39th chapter, or the 5th aliyah, that Yosef was brought to Egypt. He was brought down to Egypt, and he was bought by Potiphar. And it says that God was with Yosef. Vahi Hashem et Yosef, vahi ish matzliach, vahi beveit Adonav hamitzri. God was with him, and he was a successful man. Ish matzliach doesn't just say matzliach, rather ish matzliach. That means he stood out. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. What does it mean? It means that originally he was bought as a regular slave, and he stood out, probably pretty quickly. He was exemplary. He was much better looking. He was apparently better at what he did. And he ended up being in the house of his Egyptian master. That means he received a promotion of sorts. He didn't have to live with the rest of the slaves in the hovels, but rather he became a house slave. And in societies across human history, usually the slaves who were allowed to actually live in the master's house were considered the privileged slaves, the better slaves, the ones who were closer to their masters. So this is already one promotion. And then it says, Vayadunav ki Hashem ito. And then his master saw that God was with him. V'chol asher hu oseh Hashem matzliach biyado. And everything he would do, God would cause more success through him. Vayimtza Yosef chen beinav vayisharet oto. So Joseph found favor in his master's eyes and started to serve him. That doesn't mean, it says he would serve him, but wasn't he a slave up until this point? The answer is that no, he became his personal servant. So this is another promotion. And he appointed him over his house, and everything that he had, he put in Joseph's hand. That means he made Joseph in charge of everything. So we see that this was a gradual process. Eventually, Joseph stood out, and the master took note of him, and then even brought him into the house, and eventually put him in charge of everything. Once he put him in charge in his house, and everything he had, God blessed the house of the Egyptian. That means God caused a blessing to come upon everything this Egyptian had because of Joseph. He had God's blessing in everything he owned within and without. That means that which was domestic and that which was even beyond the house. This was apparently a wealthy Egyptian. So he abandoned everything into Joseph's hands. What I mean, it says he put everything in his hands. Now this is different this is the difference between someone having an assistant and appointing his assistant the executive and then retiring. That's basically what Potiphar did. He left everything into Joseph's decision, didn't have to even put an input. He just looked at the bottom line and got the profit. Indeed, that's what some say it means. He didn't know anything about what he was doing. Ki im alechem asher hu ochel. Except for the bread that he would eat. I like 3 pshatim in this. Some say it's literal. The only thing he didn't let Joseph do was be in charge of his actual bread, because the Hebrews didn't eat bread like the Egyptians. And there's some other verses that seem to say that. And there's some who suggest that's why we don't eat leavened products on Passover, because the Egyptians ate bread and the Hebrews ate matzah, unleavened bread. Some say it's a euphemism for his wife. And the others say, I think the Rashbam says this, it means the bottom line. The lechem asher ochel. He only cared about what was coming into his coffers. And that's what happened to Yosef. And then he had time to start pampering himself. Yosef yefei Torah v'yefei moreh. Joseph was of goodly appearance and of goodly form. Of goodly form and of goodly appearance. And that's when Potiphar's wife started paying attention to him. So we see that even in Potiphar's house, this wasn't overnight, this was gradual. So too, we see that when Joseph was put into prison, it is to Potiphar's credit that he didn't actually believe his wife 100%. Otherwise, he would have had Joseph killed. Instead, he put him into prison, and it says that the fellow in charge of the prison was the Sar Beit HaSohar, what loosely translates into English as the warden. But then it mentions that the Sar HaTabachim, which is Potiphar, also determined who was Joseph's cellmates. What is Sar HaTabachim, by the way? Sar HaTabachim, that apparently is a person who's in charge of the slaughtering. Tabach is the modern Hebrew word for a cook. He's in charge of the mitbach, but it's also from the word tevach, which is a synonym for slaughtering. There's zevach and shchita and tevach. Tevach sometimes means massive slaughter as in terms of bloodshed of people. And indeed, later in the Bible, we see that the Sar HaTabachim is a chief executioner, especially among the Babylonians. And just like they have a Sar HaMashkim also, apparently the fellow in charge of the wine, the butler, but also with regards to the Babylonians, the Sar HaMashkim, Rav Shakeh, or in this case the Assyrians, Babylonians, they both speak Aramaic. The Rav Shakeh is a military officer who's in charge of executing the enemy, just like the Sar HaTabachim. Big question, were these just ceremonial names like the kind that still exist in England, even though the name has technically nothing with what the fellow does today? Is the Sar HaTabachim the chief executioner, and that's why he has a connection with the warden? Or is the Sar HaTabachim the head meat minister of the kingdom? Let's work with that pshat. He's the head of the butchers. And it means that Joseph's cellmates ended up being the head butler, that means the one in charge of the wine in the kingdom, and the Sar HaOfim, the one in charge of the bread. Meaning that through Joseph's first contacts in Egypt, he was first apprenticed and then became in charge of everything that the head meat guy would do. And then in prison, he spent about a year serving the head bread fellow and the head wine fellow. So he became intimately knowledgeable of the dealings in the kingdom with regards to the major food supplies. And this would help him sometime later. He was able to do that. Or we'll take the other shot, and these are titles that, like I said, are just ceremonial and maybe have nothing to do with what these fellows actually did. But that's a little bit difficult to say because it seems that the Sar HaOfim and the Sar HaMashkim, the wine fellow and the bread fellow, they actually did work with wine and bread. We read about their being in prison, and it says, Vayisham b'Beit HaSohar. After he was put in prison, it says he was there in the Beit HaSohar, which means, why would it mention to us again that he was put in there, so he was there? It means that he stood out. Vayhi Hashem et Yosef, and God was with Yosef. Vayedei lav chassid, so he turned grace to him. It means he made people like Yosef. Vaytein chino b'nei Sar Beit HaSohar, even was able to find favor in the eyes of the warden. So you see Joseph's already standing out, not only among the regular guards, but the warden's actually taking note of him. How often does the warden take notice of any particular prisoner? So this is remarkable. Vaytein Sar Beit HaSohar b'yad Yosef ate kol ha'asirim asher b'Beit HaSohar. It's the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners who were in this prison. Everything they were doing there, he was doing, which means that he became in charge of the daily activities in the prison. This is a prison, this is an ancient Egyptian prison, not the type of hotel prisons that exist in kind countries like the United States and Israel, where even the most vicious murderers, etc., are treated nicely and are basically on a vacation. Here they were basically left to die or put into slave labor. But Joseph was put in charge of that. Once again, he didn't see anything that Joseph did. Because he trusted God is with him. Everything Joseph did, God would cause him to have success. So you see, once again, these three verses show that Joseph basically climbed the ladder while in the prison. First he stood out and got the warden's attention. The warden put him in charge of more things, and so much so that eventually when two high-profile prisoners came to the prison, Joseph was put there to help them. And he even had thus second level connection to the Pharaoh. He predicted that this butler, the Sar Mashkim, would be returned to his post, and indeed that's what happened. And Joseph said, when the time comes, please give a good mention for me. Like I said at the beginning, some people believe that Joseph interpreted the dreams. Pharaoh was very surprised and immediately put Joseph in charge, and that's not so correct. In the biblical narratives, we don't have, let's say, transitory paragraphs. Sometimes we just introduce something like, and someone said to so-and-so. For example, Eliyahu Navi shows up on the scene in the book of Kings, I believe around the 17th chapter, or possibly a little bit earlier, the first book of Kings. It says that King Achav, that's King Ahab, was really evil and he did all sorts of things. And Eliyahu Navi said to him, we're introducing Eliyahu Navi, that's how you introduce this part, by saying he said. And there are there's hundreds of incidences in the Torah or in the rest of the Bible to begin with, and so said it, and that's how we begin a new narrative. And this is important because this verb occurs quite a few times after Joseph predicts the dream. He interprets the dream. It says that Pharaoh spoke to his advisors, because Yosef also he not only interpreted the dream, apparently he also gave advice what to do. Perhaps that was part of the dream. He said you have to gather up all the food that's going to come in the years of plenty and save it for when the famine strikes. It says, "Vayitava devar b'nei Pharaoh u'v'nei v'chol avadav." The matter was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. It doesn't mean like his menial servants. This means his ministers. And it doesn't mean like right away. It means they talked about it. Vayomer Paro avadav. So Pharaoh said to his servants, "Hanitzach hazeh ish asher ruach Elohim bo." Have you find someone who has the spirit of God in him? It means he's highly inspired. This doesn't mean he first turned to them and then turned to Joseph and said, oh, now that God has shown you all this, there's no one as wise and as understanding as you. It means first they had discussions about Joseph's plan, and then Pharaoh came and spoke to Joseph. So it says, Vayom Parol Avadav, Vayom Parol Yosef. Different situation entirely. You are going to be in charge of certain things around my house, and you are the one by whom Yishak Kol Ami. It doesn't necessarily mean kissed. It means they will be provided for. Just like Ben Meshek Biti Hu Damesek Eliezer, the one in charge of providing for my house, he is Damesek Eliezer. We have that pasuk in Lech Lecha. Joseph was put in charge of what we call home economics, but for Pharaoh's house. And then it says Vayomer Parol Yosef, and then he said to Yosef, so he just told him, you are in charge of this. He said to him again, means sometime later, when he saw that Joseph had succeeded in this, behold, I am putting you in charge of all of Egypt. What did this promotion involve? It says that he was first given his seal, which means he can make proclamations in the name of the king, and he also gave him garments of linen, a special uniform, and he gave him a golden chain around his neck. And he put him in the second chariot, the secondary chariot to his own, and they called him Avrech. That means, like the Rashbam points out, he was given a promotion, so he has a new name. That's how he put him on all of Eretz Yisrael. And then we have again, he said something to Joseph. So this is a new incident. Sometime later, after whatever Joseph did, he's going to get another promotion. He says to him, I am Pharaoh. Usually that's a way also in the Torah. God says, I am God. Is meaning I'm making a public proclamation, or something I want everybody to know. Look at the Targum. It says, no man shall lift his hand or his arm or his leg in all of Egypt. What is that referring to? It means no one's going to lift any weapon or lift his foot upon a horse. That is, I'm making you the minister of defense. That's what this pasuk means. He wasn't just in charge now of Pharaoh's home economics. He wasn't in charge of the kingdom's economics. Now he is actually in charge of defense. And by the way, this explained why Joseph could at least have an alibi, why he cares to inquire so much about potential spies coming into his kingdom. He also gave him a new name, not Avrech. This is a second promotion, or actually this would be the fourth promotion. Gave him a new name, and he gave him a wife. and she happens to be the daughter of Kohen On, as we see in the Targum. It doesn't mean a priest, it means a person in charge, Kohen, like a minister, Kohen On. On is identified as what the city that would become Heliopolis, the famous place in Egypt, and that's how Joseph went out among all of the Egyptians. So you see that it wasn't overnight, it was actually gradual. I think it might have been remarkably fast, but it definitely wasn't overnight. Perhaps there was weeks in between each successive promotion that Joseph got. It probably, for example, took a few days before Pharaoh even began to employ Joseph. He wasn't returned to prison. It doesn't say anything there about that. But after he interpreted the dream, they probably put him aside. Pharaoh might have said, let's wait and see, have some deliberations. But it definitely could not have been the way, let's say, most of us had until now thought of it. This is important because now we see that Yosef, with his confidence in God, means he trusted in him. Although there's midrashim that say he wasn't completely confident, that's there to teach us a lesson that even great tzaddikim are held to higher standards. But he's always crediting what God has done for him. He says he knows that God is giving him these messages about what to do. He's able to look ahead. And his idea, telling Pharaoh what to do about how to gather up the food during the years of plenty for the upcoming famine, shows that he already was thinking about this in advance. Rabbi Soloveitchik has a very nice drasha, one of his more famous drashot, about Joseph dreamt a dream. It says Joseph saw ahead. He was a visionary. He saw that which his brothers did. His brothers were the old country. They still lived in Eretz Canaan. They were shepherds and goat herds, and they didn't think ahead to what will happen. There's a major upheaval happening. When famines happened, that led to downfalls of kingdoms and empires and major power shifts in the region. This is going to be what makes Egypt more of a superpower. This is going to bring all this wealth into Egypt. It's going to cause Egypt to dominate other lands because of this famine. It's going to cause an influx of immigration into Egypt because that's where the food is, an influx of wealth. And Joseph saw this. Joseph warned people about this. He said it's happening. He said about the 7 years of famine, of the plenty, and people saw it come true, and even had so much confidence to say, even though Pharaoh was the one given the dream, when his brothers eventually came to Egypt, he said, you should know there's another 5 years of famine coming. By that point, they didn't question. They didn't say, how do you know this? They knew he was given this gift by God to see ahead. He also arranged for his brothers to come. God willing, next year when we get to Miketz, we'll be able to talk about that. What did Joseph plan specifically for his brothers? But we should know that often it doesn't take a prophet necessarily. Joseph was not a prophet, doesn't say God spoke to him, but he was given these dreams, which is a level below prophecy, and he was also given the ability to interpret other people's dreams, the Sarah Mashkim, the Seraphim, and Pharaoh's dreams himself. God gives specially inspired people like that, his chosen ones, the ability to notice things and see ahead. They said, who is someone who wise? Haroet hanolat, someone who sees what's coming. Joseph was the quintessential wise man who saw ahead. He was able to take God's message. He was able to read between the lines of all these things and prepare for a better future. He even credits that. He says to his brothers at the very end, he forgives them for what he said, selling him into slavery or for having him kidnapped. He says it was all part of God's plan. God did this in order to make us all survive through this famine. Lachayot amrav. And that is the way we should all have an attitude. We should all have this idea that in our heads that God is providing for us and has a plan. And sometimes He even grants us wise people or prophets or the books of the prophets, so we know how we ourselves should also plan ahead for the future. Have a Shabbat Shalom.